Imagine a police officer with 20 years on the force, convinced his badge makes him untouchable. He pulls over a young black woman for a minor traffic violation, but this isn't a routine stop. It's a power trip. He threatens her, intimidates her, and profiles her in the driving rain. What he doesn't know is that this woman is the one person in the city with the absolute power to end his career. Her name is Captain Evelyn Reed, and she's the new head of internal affairs. This is the story of how a single traffic stop exposed a corrupt officer and shocked an entire police department to its core. If you believe in accountability and that no one should be above the law, then you need to see how this story ends. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because we bring you the real-life dramas where justice is served. This story of power and justice has resonated with people across the globe. We're curious, which country are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below, and show some love for your homeland. The polished linoleum floor of the suburban police precinct gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside and the one brewing in Officer Mike Reynolds' chest. He finished writing his report on a fender bender with a sharp, definitive period, the click of his pen echoing his satisfaction. He was a man who believed in boxes, things that fit neatly into categories, problems with clear, simple solutions. At 45, with a build that still hinted at his high school football days and a jawline that seemed permanently set in mild disapproval, Mike saw the world in binaries, right and wrong, us and them. His partner, a younger, more idealistic cop named Ben, was scrolling through his phone, shaking his head. Another complaint about the Johnson kids' loud music. Mrs. Gable says it's urban noise. Mike didn't look up. There's a decibel limit for a reason, Ben. Rules are rules. Doesn't matter what you call it. His tone was final, a closed door. This was his world, a world of orderly streets and orderly thinking, and he was its steadfast guardian. Meanwhile, across town, a sleek black sedan pulled into a reserved parking spot at the Internal Affairs building, a place Mike and his colleagues only spoke of in whispers. Getting out was Captain Evelyn Reed. At 50, she carried an aura of unshakable calm authority. Her hair was a crown of intricate braids, her pantsuit impeccably tailored, and her eyes missed nothing. She navigated the sterile corridors with a familiar ease, nodding at subordinates who offered her respectful greetings. On her desk sat a thick file folder, its contents a simmering pot of allegations, anonymous complaints and patterns of behavior that pointed to a rotten apple in the precinct she'd just been assigned to clean up. The name at the top of several concerning reports was Officer Michael Reynolds. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, a college student, about a study group running late. Evelyn's response was swift and warm, a stark contrast to the cold focus she would soon need to employ. She was a mother, a leader, and now the hunter of a wolf who didn't yet know he was being hunted. The stage was set, two worlds orbiting each other, unaware of the collision course that a simple, rainy traffic stop was about to initiate. The rain had intensified, sheeting down the windshield of Mike's patrol car in relentless waves. The wipers beat a frantic rhythmic tempo against the gloom. "Dispatch 7 Adam 12, show me 10-8. Heading to that noise complaint on Elm," Mike said into the radio, his voice a low rumble. Ben sighed. "You know, for a guy who enforces the law, you really hate joy, Mike." Mike just grunted, his eyes scanning the slick streets. That's when he saw it. A late-model BMW, pristine and dark, gliding a good 10 miles over the speed limit. It was out of place in this modest neighborhood, a shark in a pond of minnows. His instincts, honed by 20 years on the force, tingled. "Let's see who's in a hurry," he muttered, flipping on the lights. The red and blue beams sliced through the rainy haze, reflecting off the BMW's tinted windows. The car pulled over with smooth precision. Mike approached, his raincoat beading with water, his posture the very picture of institutional authority. The window slid down silently. Inside sat a young black woman, maybe 20 years old, her hands already placed on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The interior was spotless. "License and registration, ma'am," Mike said, his voice flat. The woman, whose name was Chloe Reed, Evelyn's daughter, reached slowly for her glove compartment. "That's right here, officer." Her voice was calm, but there was a tension in her shoulders. Mike took the documents, his eyes scanning the interior of the car, looking for anything out of place. "You know why I pulled you over?" "I assume I was speeding," Chloe said, keeping her voice even. "You assume correctly. In a bit of a rush. The question was standard, but his tone carried an unspoken accusation. I have a study group, officer. At the library. Mike nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her, on the car that seemed too expensive for a student, on the air freshener dangling from the mirror. Step out of the vehicle, please. Ben, watching from the passenger seat, shifted uncomfortably. Mike, come on. It's a speeding ticket. Mike ignored him. This was a ritual, a dance of power he knew well. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mother's lessons were ingrained. Be polite, be clear, record everything. She subtly activated the voice memo app on her phone before stepping out into the rain. The cold rain immediately soaked through Chloe's light jacket. Mike stood before her, a bulky silhouette against the pulsating police lights. You know, a car like this, lots of insurance. You got proof of that? His voice was louder now, needing to compete with the downpour. It's in the glove compartment with my registration. You're holding it. Chloe's voice trembled slightly despite her best efforts. Mike glanced at the paper, then back at her. This address is in Oak Meadows. That's a pretty nice neighborhood. This your car? The implication hung in the air, heavy and toxic. It's my mother's. And what does your mother do? He pressed, circling her slowly, his eyes scrutinizing the car as if it were evidence itself. She works in public service. Ben had gotten out of the car now, his own raincoat on. Mike, let's just write the ticket. She's getting soaked. Mike waved a dismissive hand. I'll decide when we're done here. He turned his attention back to Chloe. Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle? Make sure everything's in order. Chloe knew her rights. I'd rather you not, officer. I've given you my documents. I'd like to be on my way. Her refusal was like a spark on gasoline. Mike's affable mask slipped completely. You'd rather I not? Well, let me tell you something. When an officer asks you a question, it's in your best interest to cooperate. This evasiveness makes you look suspicious. He moved closer, invading her personal space. I could have a K9 unit here in 5 minutes. You know what they can smell? Trouble? Chloe stood her ground, the phone in her pocket silently capturing every word, every threat, every drop of condescension. I am not being evasive, officer. I am exercising my rights. Am I being detained or am I free to go? The phrase, so often taught in seminars about police encounters, seemed to enrage him further. It was a challenge to his authority, a crack in the foundation of his controlled world. You'll go when I say you can go. The standoff in the rain felt like an eternity. Finally, with a sneer of contempt, Mike scribbled out a ticket for the speeding violation and thrust it at her. Here, consider this a warning. But I've got my eye on you. People like you in cars like this, it usually adds up to something. Chloe took the ticket, her hand shaking not from fear anymore, but from a cold, purifying fury. She didn't say a word. She simply got back in her car, closed the door, and watched the patrol car pull away, its lights extinguishing as it disappeared into the grey downpour. The moment she was alone, the dam broke. Tears of rage and humiliation mixed with the rainwater on her face. But then she looked at the phone in her hand, the recording app still glowing. She didn't drive to the library. She drove straight home. When Evelyn Reed arrived later that evening, she found her daughter sitting at the kitchen table, silent and tense, a single piece of paper and a phone lying between them like an accusation. Mom, Chloe said, her voice quiet but firm. We need to talk. She played the recording. Evelyn listened, her expression not changing, but a storm gathering in her eyes that dwarfed the one outside. She heard the condescension, the profiling, the blatant abuse of power. She heard the voice of Officer Michael Reynolds, a man whose file was already on her desk. When the audio finished, the kitchen was silent. Evelyn reached out and took her daughter's hand. Are you okay? Chloe nodded. Evelyn picked up the phone, her movements now precise and filled with a terrifying calm. This stops now. She made a call, her voice all business. This is Captain Reed. I need a full personnel file pulled and all pending complaints consolidated, and schedule an interview with Officer Michael Reynolds for 0900 tomorrow. Tell him it's a mandatory meeting with Internal Affairs. She hung up and looked at her daughter, not as a captain now, but as a mother. He will answer for this personally. The following morning, the sun shone with a brutal cheerfulness, glinting off the badge on Mike Reynolds' uniform as he parked his personal truck in the Internal Affairs lot. He'd spent the evening fuming, the encounter with the entitled girl in the BMW eating at him. The mandatory meeting with IA was an annoyance, a bureaucratic box to check, probably some new sensitivity training module. He walked through the automatic doors with a swagger that was half confidence, half armor. The place was too quiet, the air too still, smelling of antiseptic and whispered secrets. A stern-faced secretary directed him to a conference room. He entered, expecting a group setting, but found the room empty save for a large, polished table and a single file folder. He sat, drumming his fingers, replaying the previous night's encounter in his head. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd maintained control. He'd issued a citation. The girl's attitude was the problem, not his conduct. The door opened behind him. He didn't bother to stand, a calculated show of disrespect for the IA process. Officer Reynolds. The voice was a woman's, calm, low, and carried an immediate, unassailable authority that made the hairs on his neck stand up. He turned slowly in his chair, and then he saw her. Captain Evelyn Reed stood at the head of the table, placing a tablet and a notepad down with deliberate slowness. She was imposing not in size but in presence. Her gaze was like a physical weight, pinning him to his seat. It took a second, a horrifying, slow-dawning second for the recognition to click, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the shape of her face, the set of her jaw. It was an older, harder, infinitely more powerful version of the girl from the car. The world tilted on its axis. His swagger evaporated, replaced by a cold, trickling dread that started in his stomach and spread outwards. This was no coincidence. This was a trap, and he had walked right into it. "Captain," he managed, his voice tighter than he intended. Evelyn Reed took her seat, never breaking eye contact. "Thank you for coming in this morning, officer. We have some matters to discuss regarding your conduct and overall performance." She opened the file folder. It was thick, alarmingly thick. "Let's start with something recent. A traffic stop yesterday evening. Elm Street, a black BMW. Do you recall the incident?" Mike's mind raced, scrambling for footing. "Vaguely. A speeding violation. I issued a citation. Is that all?" she asked, her tone deceptively mild. "According to my report, yes." "Your report," she repeated, tapping a finger on a page. "It's very succinct. It leaves out quite a bit of the conversation, doesn't it? The questions about the car's ownership, the neighborhood, the implication that the driver might be involved in something other than going to a study group." Mike felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his spine. "I was conducting a routine investigation. The vehicle was expensive, the driver was nervous. It's my job to be thorough." "Thorough," Captain Reed echoed, and the word sounded like a condemnation, or discriminatory. She let the question hang in the air between them. A grenade with the pin pulled. "I object to that characterization, Captain." "Your objection is noted," she said, as if swatting away a fly. "But let's move beyond characterization. Let's talk about facts." She slid the tablet across the table. On the screen was a frozen audio waveform. The driver of the vehicle recorded the entire interaction. "Would you like to hear what thorough sounds like from the other side of your badge?" Before he could answer, she pressed play. The voice that filled the sterile conference room was Mike's, but it was a distorted version, stripped of the authority he'd felt in the moment, and replaced with a grating, petty nastiness. "You know, a car like this, lots of insurance. You got proof of that?" Hearing his own words played back to him was a uniquely horrifying experience. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash from inside the vehicle. He heard the dismissive tone, the condescending questions about the neighborhood, the not-so-subtle insinuation that a young black woman couldn't legitimately own a nice car. He heard his own voice threaten a K-9 unit, a blatant and empty intimidation tactic. He heard Chloe's calm, polite responses, which only highlighted his own escalating aggression. He wanted to interrupt, to explain the context, to say that the recording didn't capture the whole story, but Captain Reed's impassive gaze silenced him. She was a statue of judgment, letting the evidence speak for itself. The audio played to its devastating conclusion, ending with his own voice dripping with contempt. "People like you in cars like this, it usually adds up to something." The click of the tablet being turned off was deafening. The silence that followed was heavier, more accusatory than the recording itself. Mike's face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He felt exposed, flayed open. All his justifications, his internal narrative of being a good cop keeping order, crumbled to dust in the face of that recording. He wasn't the hero in this story. He was the bully. That's not a fair representation," he stammered. the weakness in his voice appalling even to him. It was raining. I was on edge. She was being evasive. Captain Reed leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her hands steepled. Officer Reynolds, for 20 years, your performance reviews have noted a tendency toward inflexibility and a lack of cultural sensitivity. They used softer terms, of course. They called you old school. They said you had a sharp edge. This, she gestured to the tablet, is not an edge. This is the core. This recording isn't an isolated incident. It is a symptom. She opened the thick file folder. Complaint from a Mr. David Chen, who you stopped for a broken taillight and subsequently interrogated about his immigration status for 20 minutes. He's a third-generation American. Complaint from the Rodriguez family, whose son you arrested for disorderly conduct after a basketball game. Witness statements say you escalated the situation using profanity and excessive force. The charges were dropped. She flipped a page. Shall I continue? There's a pattern here, officer. A pattern of viewing certain citizens, not as people you protect and serve, but as problems you need to control. You see the world in boxes, and you've decided which boxes belong in your orderly version of this city, and which boxes need to be managed. Mike felt the walls closing in. Each name, each incident, was a nail in the coffin of his career. He had dismissed those complaints as the grumblings of people who didn't like being held accountable. He never thought they would be gathered together like this, woven into a rope strong enough to hang him. I have a stellar arrest record, he countered. A last desperate defense. My conviction rate is one of the highest in the precinct. At what cost? Captain Reed's voice was dangerously quiet. You are not a judge, jury, and executioner. You are a public servant. Your job is to uphold the law, not to be the law. And from where I'm sitting, you have been violating the public trust consistently and systematically. You have forgotten that the badge is a symbol of service, not a shield for prejudice. She closed the file with a definitive thud. This meeting is not about a single traffic stop, Officer Reynolds. This is about whether you are fit to wear that badge at all. The word prejudice hit Mike like a physical blow, knocking the last vestiges of his defensive posture away. He wanted to rage against it, to shout that he wasn't a racist, that he treated everyone the same, but the recording echoed in his mind, a damning testament to the contrary. He saw himself not as the principled officer he believed himself to be, but through Captain Reed's eyes, through Chloe's eyes. He saw a man abusing a sliver of power to make a young woman feel small and criminal for the sin of driving while black. The image sickened him. His career, his identity, his entire sense of self, was built on the foundation of being one of the good guys. Now that foundation was shattered, revealing something ugly and rotten underneath. Captain Reed watched the fight drain out of him, her expression unchanging. She was not enjoying this. She was conducting a surgical removal of a cancer. This isn't just about punishment, Officer Reynolds. It's about accountability. It's about the fact that every one of these incidents, she tapped the file, eroded the trust this department is supposed to have with the community. Your actions make every single officer's job harder. They put your partners at risk. They create the very divisions we are sworn to bridge. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. So here are the facts you need to contend with. As of this moment, you are suspended without pay, pending a full disciplinary review. You will turn in your badge and your service weapon before you leave this building. You are to have no contact with any members of the public in your capacity as an officer. The review board will examine this file. They will listen to that recording, and they will decide if termination is the appropriate course of action. I can tell you, with that recording as evidence, it is the most likely outcome. Each sentence was a hammer blow. Suspended, without pay. Badge and gun, termination. The words echoed in the hollow space inside him. This was the end. The end of everything he had worked for over 2 decades. The pension, the respect, the very definition of who he was, all of it gone. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had written thousands of tickets, helped change tires and, he now forced himself to admit, had gripped a baton too tightly, had pointed a finger too aggressively. He thought of Ben, his partner, who had tried to rein him in. He thought of all the times he'd dismissed a complaint as political correctness. He had been so blind. Captain Reed stood up, the movement graceful and final. There is one more thing. Mike looked up, expecting another formal charge. Her gaze was still firm, but there was a new dimension to it now, something profoundly personal. "The young woman in the BMW, Chloe Reed, she is my daughter." The revelation landed with the force of a tectonic shift. This wasn't just an internal affairs investigation anymore. This was a mother, looking at the man who had terrorized her child. The professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, and Mike saw the raw, protective fury in her eyes. "You threatened my child. You attempted to intimidate and humiliate her, for no reason other than your own biased assumptions. You will never know the fear a parent feels hearing that recording. So understand this clearly. While the department will decide your professional fate, I am here to ensure that you, Michael Reynolds, are held personally accountable for the poison you have been spreading. This ends with you." The drive home was a blur. Mike Reynolds moved through the motions like an automaton, the weight of his empty holster, and the absent badge from his chest feeling like a phantom limb, a constant agonizing reminder of what he had lost. The world outside his windshield looked the same streets, the same shops, but he was seeing it through new eyes, eyes that had been forcibly opened. He didn't go to the precinct to clear out his locker. He couldn't face the stares, the questions, the silent judgment from men he'd called brothers. He went straight home to the silent, empty house that suddenly felt like a tomb for the man he used to be. He sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten breakfast just that morning as Officer Reynolds, and replayed his entire career. He saw the countless times he'd chosen suspicion over empathy, control over understanding. He saw the faces of the people he'd pushed around, the lives he'd made a little bit harder, all in the name of order. Captain Reed's words echoed in his mind. "You have forgotten that the badge is a symbol of service, not a shield for prejudice." She was right. He had hidden behind the shield, using it to justify his own deep-seated biases, convincing himself that his way was the only way to keep the peace. The peace for whom? He realized now it was only peace for people who looked and thought like him. The review process was swift and merciless. With the audio recording and Captain Reed's meticulously compiled file, his termination was a foregone conclusion. There was no public spectacle, no dramatic courtroom scene. It was a quiet administrative death. The official letter arrived, stating the facts without emotion. He was no longer a police officer. He was just Mike Reynolds, a middle-aged man with a dishonorable discharge from the only career he'd ever wanted. But the story didn't end with his firing. The shockwaves rippled outwards. The precinct, under Captain Reed's new, unwavering leadership, implemented mandatory, intensive bias training. Not the token seminars Mike had always slept through, but hard, confrontational workshops that forced officers to examine their own preconceptions. Community liaison programs were strengthened, and a new transparent system for handling complaints was established. The old-school way was no longer an excuse. It was a liability. Mike, in the depths of his shame, did something he never thought he would do. He wrote a letter, not a legal appeal, but a handwritten letter of apology to Chloe Reed. He didn't justify his actions. He simply apologized for the fear he caused, for the humiliation he inflicted, for the person he had allowed himself to become. He mailed it without expectation of a reply. He didn't deserve one. Chloe did receive the letter. She read it once, then put it away in a drawer. She didn't need his apology to validate her experience, but she acknowledged the small, difficult step he had taken. It was a fragment of progress, paid for with her own distress. She continued her studies, more determined than ever, her own understanding of justice forever deepened. Mike Reynolds eventually found work as a security consultant, a pale shadow of his former life. He was a quieter man, the arrogance gone, replaced by a perpetual weary introspection. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true strength isn't about dominating others, but about mastering the worst parts of yourself. And sometimes, the most important justice isn't delivered in a courtroom, but in a quiet conference room by a woman who refused to let a badge become a weapon against her own child.